on. All right, welcome everybody, and thank you to those joining us digitally through Zoom. We'll bring to order the Washoe County Open Space and Regional Parks Commission meeting for Tuesday, June 2nd at 2:32. Roll call, please.
Stephanie Chen,
Here.
Polly Boardman,
Present.
Heidi Anderson,
Present.
Doug Doolittle,
Present.
Thomas Gwynn,
Present.
Darla Lee,
Present.
Chris Nenzel,
Present.
Jennifer Oliver,
Here.
Greg Shorts.
Here.
Perfect. Everyone's here. We have a quorum. Thank you. Commissioner Shorts, can you lead us to the pledge?
Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right. Do we have any public comments?
We have no public comment.
Okay, thank you. Before we get started, I just want to ask everyone to help our secretaries out. If you can state your name before speaking, that would be very helpful. Thank you. We'll go ahead and move to item 4, approval of the agenda for the Open Space and Regional Parks Commission meeting of June 2nd, 2020. Do we have any additions or corrections?
Move to approve. Greg Shorts.
Jennifer Oliver, second.
Okay. Thank you. Can we, all in favor, can we get an aye? Aye. All right.
Aye.
All righty. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Next item, 5, approval of the minutes for the Open Space and Regional Parks Commission meeting of March 3rd, 2020. Any additions or corrections?
Move to approve. Doug Doolittle.
Thank you, Doug.
Second, Heidi Anderson.
Perfect. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Okay. So item 6, acknowledgement and recognition of park operations staff for their outstanding service and contributions to Washoe County.
This is Eric Crump. We do not have any this time.
Okay. Is there a way to put the volume up? We can, it's really faint. Okay. Thank you, Eric. I heard to confirm that there are no recognitions or acknowledgements for today. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Item 7, do we have an Eagle Scout presentation today?
We do not.
Okay. No Eagle Scout presentation, so we'll move on to item 8, and hopefully they're working on our volume so that we can hear everyone through Zoom properly.
Can everybody hear me okay? This is, for the record, Colleen Wallace-Barnum.
It's a little faint, Colleen, so I think they're trying to figure out how to get that volume up, and then we'll let you know. Can you try to speak again?
Okay. I will maybe I'll try to speak louder.
That's much better. There you go.
Louder helping?
Yeah, that's much better. Thank you. Okay.
Great.
We'll go.
Okay,
Oh,
I'm gonna start the slideshow. I know it has Eric Crump providing this presentation on the agenda, but I am taking over the presentation for him right now. And I'm just gonna start the slideshow. And here we go. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, for the record, Colleen Wallace-Barnum, Park Operations Superintendent. Thank you all for providing the opportunity to give an update on the COVID-19 response and park operations plan. It's been quite an experience over the past 2.5 months. And when the pandemic really first hit our area, things were changing on an almost daily basis. But throughout it all, park staff have continued to provide safe parks for our community. They never did close. We kept them open to the public this entire time. Our staff has been amazing. They've been continuously evaluating lots of the guidelines, kind of combing through CDC regulations, OSHA regulations, the National Parks and Recreation Association, and keeping in touch with agency partners locally to basically try to be consistent in what types of services we are providing to our community throughout all of this. So during the initial response, park operations is part of the Community Services Department and the operations function. So the primary objectives for CSD are outlined in the bullet points here. Primarily to continue to provide life safety actions. So park, road, facility, equipment services, all those operations were ongoing during this entire pandemic and are still ongoing, as well as any type of emergency response needed. We also wanted to make sure we were continuing to provide any of our planning, development, intake, permitting activities for building, planning, engineering, sewer, and business licensing. We also want to make sure we're providing a safe working environment for all of the objectives to occur for both staff and for the public coming into any of our offices and or to our parks. And then also we were wanting to make sure we were doing our part as a community to lessen the transmission of COVID-19, to help in keeping our healthcare system functioning for those that truly needed it. And then finally, to keep Washoe County employees working. So all these guidelines were set in place early on during the pandemic for the Community Services Department overall. And then park operations. Certainly what we know is that the parks are and will continue to be a critical component of our community's physical and mental well-being as we navigate through this pandemic. I will let you know that staff has regularly let me know that parks have been incredibly busy. Midweek numbers were really what we typically would see on weekends. Most people were doing a great job social distancing and utilizing the areas in the park that were available. So since March 17th, the parks remained open, but we continued to close amenities within the parks. And those typically were areas where people, either could gather, such as group picnic areas or, things that were high touch surfaces such as playgrounds. So as more information came out on how parks were being managed throughout the nation, we continued following suit and closing a lot of our different amenities within parks. We wanted to remain as consistent as possible regionally. Therefore, we were communicating with our local parks and recreation leaders for Reno, Sparks, Carson City, and several other agencies throughout Nevada. So wanted to make sure everybody was aware, we closed almost everything, including restrooms and trash facilities. So really, other than, kind of trails and the open areas within parks, most everything was really closed. And then once we started getting news from the governor's office, and all of our closures were in line with the governor's directives. And then as we started getting directives for the reopening and the roadmap to recovery for Nevada, we began working on that phased approach. So phase 1 began on May 9th and lasted until May 28th. And then the focus was really on park amenities for individuals or household members. So the idea was to continue small groups of 10 or less and make sure that we were not opening back up areas where people could gather in groups of 10 or more. So parks, trails, individual picnic areas, restrooms and trash services were brought back on in that time frame, pretty much right after May 9th, we started getting all those things back in order. Tennis, pickleball, basketball courts were brought back up. The disc golf courses were allowed to reopen. Dog parks never closed, so we kept those open and available. Skate parks, horse arenas, and then the regional archery facility. We actually, as well as the regional shooting facility, we brought back in a modified operation. Golf courses are modified as well as a regional shooting facility. And the way we modified it was basically just capacity. We opened every other shooting table for the regional shooting facility. And then for golf courses, it really was reducing the amount of touchable surfaces and the sharing of items. So those were the modified operations for phase 1. And then we moved into phase 2 on June 1st, so just yesterday. And on June 1st, we reopened the Davis Creek Campground for both individual sites, and the group sites are available only for groups of 50 or less, in line with the directive from the governor's office. We reopened reservable picnic pavilions and buildings under the same caveat of groups of 50 or less. And then just so you know, the vast majority of reservations canceled. Lots and lots of reservations canceled just based on the numbers that they were hoping to have for their event that they just simply couldn't do, and or the timing of, when the directives came out and just the inability to plan appropriately. So, but we are allowing groups that may have a smaller capacity facility to to basically go into a larger capacity facility. Like, for example, our group picnic areas typically have a size limit. So our large group picnic areas and medium group picnic areas can have 100 people. We would allow a group of 50 people to go to one of those reservable picnic spaces if they so chose. Otherwise, we've offered full refunds with no penalties whatsoever for any of our groups. The Hive at Lazy 5 has reopened for pickleball and basketball, and then athletic field permits. Every one of the groups that has an athletic field permit has had to provide us their plan of how they are going to manage their operation. So we're working through that, and we're hoping to have that completed by the end of the week, by June 5th. Contract classes and programs, for example, dance, karate, those types of classes, those resumed also on June 1st. As well, all of those contract class contacts have had to provide a modified operation in line with CDC guidelines specific for their types of functions. And the CDC gets real specific on different types of programs that are out there, for almost everything out there that we do. And then just yesterday, we had a conference call, and we're looking at potentially reopening the Galena Creek Visitor Center. But their phased approach in phase 2 would just be to provide the services outdoors. So they would bring some tables outside and then provide some information to the public that way. The majority of their maps and whatnot that they would normally be handing out to the public would actually be, they would scan them all and make them downloadable, via PDF, and they were going to have QR codes so people could scan the QR code and maybe get the trail map downloaded onto, a smartphone. So that's phase 2 of the park operations plan. And then phase 3, we're hoping, this is estimated June 21st, roughly, that we could potentially go into phase 3. And in phase 3, we would reopen park offices, the Wilbur D. May Museum. I put Galena Creek Visitor Center on here twice. That should have been in phase 2. Playgrounds, volunteer groups, so allowing larger groups of volunteers to come and help. The Robert C. Hawkins Amphitheater, and that opening would certainly be based on any type of a size guideline associated with phase 3 from the governor's office. And then, of course, special events that would fit within that phasing. So, all of these are what we're hoping to be able to do. And again, kind of when those directives come out, we're scrambling for a couple of days trying to make sure that what we are reopening is in line with how the CDC guidelines and the OSHA guidelines are recommending those openings. And then just to also throw out there, the phased reopenings, I know it happens on a certain date, and a lot of times people think, well, phase 2 started on May 29th. Well, we have to be ready. So we feel comfortable, we talk pretty regularly. We have Zoom meetings, and Teams meetings with the staff that's involved, and we try to make sure that we are not reopening before we're completely ready. So that's why we chose June 1st for several of our openings as opposed to the May 29th date. And a lot of times our reservation staff are taking lots of phone calls from the public. They want answers immediately, I mean, right after the governor's message. But we do want to make sure we're taking our time and making those decisions in the best light for everybody's safety. And then wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that the aquatics facilities for the 2020 season are going to remain closed. So Bowers Mansion Pool, the Emilio Gaspari Water Play Park at Lazy 5, and then the North Valley Splash Park will all remain closed for the 2020 season. This was a really difficult decision. It's certainly not what we want to do. We certainly want to be able to provide those services for the public. However, it's already a really short season, and knowing that we would have to do, smaller capacities and then a shorter season, it's only ever 8 weeks at the most. By the time we would be ready to open, we might be ready to just close back up. So unfortunately, we made the decision to keep them closed. But I will let you know that all of those facilities need some degree of repair work. So we are using this time wisely and trying to get those repairs done so that we can be ready and open even better for next season. Just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. You probably have all heard it in the news, but and yes, it's not a rumor, it is true. The next slide I wanted to show you was, it's on our website, and the website is where we are keeping all of our COVID-19 updates. That is the most up-to-date information. So if you're looking for any up-to-date information, it's going to be there. And this matrix was created just to kind of show you how we went from phase to phase, or how we plan to go from phase to phase in terms of reopening and those modifications of a modified approach. So the modifications are what really takes a lot of time to figure out. I can tell you it's a lot easier to close facilities, but to bring them back on is a lot more effort. And really, I have to put a tremendous amount of thought and reading through lots of different guidelines out there. There's many different organizations putting information out there. So we're trying to make sure we're reading through those and staying most up to date with any of the industry standards. And finally, just wanted to say a big thank you to all of our park staff. Again, they've been amazing. They've been working this entire time, and we are so thankful for everybody's dedication, especially during this difficult time. So big thank you to everybody out there. And are there any questions?
Any questions over Zoom? No. Okay, not hearing anything. Thank you, Colleen, for that update, and thank you to the park staff. Oh,
I'm sorry, Doug Doolittle, I do have a question.
Sure.
Couldn't figure out how to get this on. During this whole 2.5 month process, and I applaud all the effort that you folks have been making, and I know it's hard, and I also support the idea of not having the pools open now, because it'd be hard to get the lifeguards in, train them, and do everything you have to do to get them ready for use. But the question I have relates to vandalism. Have you had any vandalism at all during this period of time?
We have had a lot of vandalism in the last 2 weeks. Yes, we have.
And
It's been graffiti up and down facilities, almost tagging every surface. So yes, we have definitely seen an uptick in vandalism, but again, just in the last couple of weeks.
Tough times, not only with COVID-19, but with all of the political unrest in the country right now. And is that, do you have the resources, or does the Sheriff's Department have the resources to help you with that? Or is that pretty much going unchecked at the moment?
If we know of an area that we're thinking might, get hit, we can certainly ask for additional patrols, but that's pretty much the most we can do. We have some staff on now that we're past Memorial Day, we do have some seasonal staff that are working until 9 o'clock at night. So we still we do have staffing, from 6 a.m. till 9 p.m. most days.
All right, thank you.
I have some questions.
Sure.
This is Commissioner Kitty Jung. And first of all, Ms. Wallace-Barnum, I want to thank you so much and your staff. I know this was something we've never done before and nothing we really even could prepare for. So great work, great job. We can't do anything here if it's not for the staff that are able to be flexible and change their work habits and their work-life balance. So I really appreciate you. I know this was a heavy lift. One thing I'm going to ask you, and this is a heads up for every other area in Washoe County, so you're first, and you don't have to answer now, but just be ready for this. I do want each department, and specifically Parks and Open Space, to have a plan for reclosures should we see a spike occur anytime in the future, and what your tightening plan would be, because I'm guessing you learned a lot from closing and reopening, that you would have a better grasp on what your plan would be and where each of these facilities would fall in the phase according to you, because really the governor does set the bare minimum we have to do. We can always go tighter than what the governor does. In certain situations, I do get that. That's a broad statement, that there are some generalities that go to it. So I'm just going to ask everybody for that. So if you could be thinking about that and working on it, don't worry about it today, but be aware that is something I'm going to ask. And I'm going to ask it from the governor as well. And what I specifically want to know is turnaround times, and so that we can communicate very distinctly and specifically to our citizens. And then I also, since we are closing, not reopening the aquatic facilities, I do want to see a copy of what is the repair work, what is the plan, how much money is being spent, and what the timelines are for each of that. And that should be given to the entire this Board of Commissioners for Parks and Open Space as well. And the reason why I'm asking for that is because that is a great pivot for these thought leaders who are commissioners for Parks and Open Space and influencers in their own communities, so that they have a pivot to say, well, actually, in that time frame, these are the things we're working on. This is what you can expect. So it's more communication just to help us get your message out. But I definitely don't have any complaints or concerns. I think you guys have done this flawlessly, and I'd rather you take more time to do it right than to do it quickly, because you're getting so much political or citizen pressure, so that we maintain, as government, we have to be the models of how to be safe, and expediency is not safety. So thank you so very much. Great work.
Welcome. Thank you, Commissioner Jung.
Okay. Thank you all. Okay, we'll move on to item 9, presentation and discussion on fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21 budget and impacts from COVID-19.
Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. This is Eric Crump. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Let's see, looks like Colleen's still sharing her, there we go. So I have a slide deck I'll be going along. All right, can you all see that?
We can.
Great. So much like, we've been hearing and seeing about in the news across, well, the world and in the country, certainly the COVID-19 response has had some impacts on Washoe County. So today I really just wanted to highlight those impacts. This slide deck that I'm using today is largely comprised of slides directly taken from a presentation that was given to our Board of County Commissioners back in May. on the budget. And then at the end, I've added some information specific to Washoe County parks and the impacts to Washoe County parks. So here's just a quick overview of our fiscal year budget and schedule. Much of what I'm talking about today was adopted as part of the board during the Board of County Commissioners May 19th meeting, and our final budget has been submitted to the state. Obviously, we had to make a lot of last-minute changes between the tentative budget that we had submitted to the state to this final budget based on this COVID-19 response. So our budget team, Lori Cook, our budget manager, assistant county manager, Christine Voletich, and our county manager, Eric Brown, worked and kind of had to scrub through a lot of information to try to figure out how to base the fiscal year 21 budget moving forward. There's a lot of unknowns. So kind of taking a look nationally, I won't read all of this, but there's certainly some highlights here. 22.7 million jobs that were gained during the economic recovery have been wiped out. So basically all the growth that we've seen since 2009 has been wiped out in a matter of months. Our unemployment rate is now somewhere between 15 and almost 20%. For the week ending April 25th, Nevada's unemployment rate was 19.9. So that's the highest rate we've had in our state history. And then consumer spending was down 7.6 in March. And it's the biggest decline we've seen since they began taking records in 1959. So we're kind of breaking records, but not of the good kind. This is more kind of some unprecedented information, and this will just kind of put our budget into some context. The first quarter, the gross domestic product contracted 4.8%. So that economic expansion that we've been experiencing, which is the longest since post-war, is now officially over. Pending home sales index has plunged. Housing starts have collapsed. And on May 11th, Governor Sisolak declared a state of fiscal emergency with an estimated budget shortfall of 741 to 911 million through just this fiscal year, June 30th, 2020. So, obviously when we were trying to respond to the COVID-19, we were in fiscal year 20, which is going, set to end the end of this month. And our initial concern was how to make it through the current fiscal year. And now really what we're focused on is how we're going to get through the next 12 or 18 months or however long these impacts take. And that's really, some of the unknowns that we're talking about right now. So, we anticipate a prolonged sales tax impact, and I'll talk a little bit about C-tax and how much C-tax represents the county's budget. We are still dependent on tourism and gaming, making for a higher risk of economic impact to us if people cannot or will not travel. Property tax impacts, new development and construction is obviously slowing. Cash flows are declining and our sources of revenue are declining. The general fund, although certainly healthy, it doesn't have adequate resources to shore up any deficits in other funds. We've got some pending litigation still in Incline Village. We have a special legislation session possible, and then impact on the county's credit rating. So these are the figures that budget has been using to help us kind of determine what mitigation measures we can put in place. So fiscal year 20 is our current fiscal year. As you can imagine, these impacts started happening in March. And so the current fiscal year is set to end at the end of this month, like I said earlier, and we're expecting a revenue loss of about almost $15 million. And then our response cost is nearing $10 million. So we're looking at financial impacts of nearly $25 million in current fiscal year. And then looking out into next fiscal year, they are anticipating another roughly $40 million. So for a total impact or deficit of $65 million. Washoe County, they've obviously established some goals as we work through this, focusing our priorities on support for public health. We may need to reduce service levels in some areas, and keeping our communication going at all levels is extremely important, especially as many of us work remotely. Our county manager, Eric Brown, has said keeping employees working is one of Washoe County's goals. Obviously, our unemployment rate is super high. We're one of the largest employers in Washoe County, and having more employed people doesn't do anybody any good, as well as we've got a job to do. And then using our reserves wisely, so kind of taking early action, and I commend our budget team for doing so. This is an interesting graph, so it kind of shows how we looked through the Great Recession. So sources being the blue line, that's basically revenue. Uses being expenses, the orange line. So you can kind of see a little uses or expenses over revenue in that 2017, 2018 period. That was the response to the flooding and the federally declared disasters that we had locally. But then moving into 2020, you see that big spread between the orange and the blue, and that's obviously of a huge concern, and that's what we're faced with right now. So here are the financial impact mitigation measures that were put in place to deal with that roughly $25 million shortfall that we anticipate for current fiscal year. So there was a one-time use of general fund balance of about $9.3 million. We reduced the general fund transfer to the capital improvement program, about $2.1 million. We reduced the contingency budget by $5.3 million. We used some marijuana revenue, transfer from our risk fund to the general fund at $3 million. We had a net savings from some vacant positions, which kind of happens normally, but we are in a hiring freeze. I'll talk about that here in a second. And then some reductions in services and supplies, so that all those kind of total up that roughly $25 million impact that we're faced with in the current fiscal year. So some of the things that helped us through this, Washoe County is currently in a hiring freeze, so any hiring is reviewed by a financial impact review committee that consists of a budget team and our 3 assistant county managers. And all large non-essential purchases that are in excess of $10,000 are reviewed by that committee as well. Budget is made to determine that there's no carry forward in expenses from fiscal year 20 to 21. So what that means, oftentimes in the general fund, if you have a project that spans from one fiscal year to the next, so you have money that is unspent in one fiscal year, you can carry that money forward in the following fiscal year to complete that project. That's not going to be allowed moving forward into fiscal year 21 to capture those savings. And then obviously, like I said before, utilizing a one-time fund balance. So looking forward, that's kind of the overview of fiscal year 20. So looking forward to fiscal year 21, which would start July 1st of this year. This is the manager's recommended budget. So everything I'm talking about today was approved by the board. That committee has been submitted now. This is just an overview kind of the overall budget and how it compares to last fiscal year's budget. So you can see a decrease there, which we wouldn't ordinarily expect from one fiscal year to the next. This just shows of the county's budget, how much is made up of general fund. So roughly 50% of the county's budget is made up of general fund. This is an interesting slide. This shows, so property tax, we're anticipating to be roughly 50% of our revenue sources, which is up, and that is specific to the C-tax being down. So C-tax is normally 30 to 33% of our budget, and now we're anticipating that to be 27%. So we're going to have a reduction in consolidated tax, or our C-tax I'll talk about. that here momentarily. Here's the property tax revenue projections. There is some good news here. These typically lag behind. So we're actually anticipating a 7% increase overall due to growth that was kind of already on the books. But the next slide is really what we've got our eye on, and that's the C-tax. So you can see for fiscal year 20, we were cruising along and we had a 9.6% increase over the prior fiscal year through February. So that's pre-COVID. And then once COVID hit, our fiscal year 20 for the balance of the year, we're anticipating roughly it took that 9.6% increase and turned it upside down and turned it into an 8.5% decrease. And then fiscal year 21, we're forecasted for nearly a 30% decrease in C-tax. So these are some of the measures that are being put in place to cover or to help deal with the roughly $37 million fiscal impact for next fiscal year. So we'll continue to stay in a hiring freeze. So all hiring will be reviewed by our Financial Impact Review Committee, otherwise known as the FERC. Purchasing freezes, so all kind of non-essential expenses in above $10,000 will be reviewed by the FERC. We're deferring several of our CIP projects. Basically, the general fund transfer to CIP has been reduced. And then personnel cost savings. This just shows the percentage kind of by expenses. So roughly 72% of our recommended budget, or actually now approved budget for fiscal year 21, is salaries and benefits. It's certainly not unheard of for a service organization. But you know, if we do have to make additional cuts, it'll likely be in salaries and benefits because that's the biggest percentage of our budget. So this is the fiscal year 21 general fund recommended budget. And I think the important point to note here is the reduction in fund balance. So obviously we have a one-time use of fund balance and we're reducing the fund balance by roughly $15 million. And so our estimated unrestricted ending fund balance at the end of fiscal year 21 is estimated to be at 48 million, or 13.6% of our operating budget. Here are the capital improvement projects that have been authorized to move forward. This is obviously a very, very small list compared to what was submitted and what is typically spent on year to year. There is one project that is park specific. It is actually the first one, it's facilities. So it's some park ADA improvements at our South Valleys Regional Park that was approved as part of a general fund CIP project for the coming year. This is some non-general fund projects that were approved. And then this, most important to parks, this is the Parks Capital Fund. So this is non-general fund. I'm happy to say that all of these projects are carrying over and moving forward for next fiscal year. So roughly $3.4 million of non-general fund parks capital projects will be moving forward. Many of them are carryovers from prior fiscal year. So what does this all mean to parks specifically? So for our current fiscal year, we did kind of a last minute reduction in our seasonal parkade and ranger maintenance program. We reduced that by roughly 6 positions. So we have a savings of roughly $33,000. As Colleen had talked about earlier in her presentation, we're reducing our seasonal and recreation aquatic positions. completely because we're not opening up those aquatic facilities. So we'll have another savings of roughly $50,000. We had approximately $145,000 balance in our park infrastructure preservation budget. These are projects that this is funding that we use in parks that is non-capital, so projects that are less than $100,000. So it's basically kind of major maintenance or replacement of those pieces of equipment that are less than $100,000. And we had $145,000 that was not yet spent. It had been earmarked for projects, but we hadn't pulled the plug or hadn't pulled the trigger on doing those projects yet. So we suspended those projects to capture that savings. And then obviously we reduced any non-essential purchases and closed our aquatic facilities. And then moving forward into fiscal year 21, I will say, so the recommended budget that has been adopted is basically the exact same budget that we have in parks this current fiscal year. I say that knowing that a lot of this is unknown. So if our projections are wrong or this COVID response has larger impacts or takes a little bit longer to recover from than we anticipated, there'll likely be additional reductions. But as of right now, our parks budget, along with all the other budgets within the county, although there were no above base, we didn't get additional money, we do have basically the same budget that we had in the current fiscal year. There will be some kind of automatic savings based on some of the decisions we had to make in the current fiscal year by not hiring those seasonals. We will see a reduction in expenses in both seasonal park aid ranger and maintenance and their aquatics programs. Those will carry over into next fiscal year, as well as our aquatic facilities being closed. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Chair Boardman, this is Dave Solaro, Director of Community Service Department. If I could put one thing on the record. Just wanted to make sure that the discussion that Mr. Crump just had regarding the capital improvement program projects have not officially been approved or recognized by the board. That information has been provided by the board to the Board of County Commissioners, but they have not yet acted upon an official budget for the capital improvement or the projects themselves. That will come later in July. Just want to make sure that was clear on the record. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple questions over here.
This is Commissioner Shorts. I'm curious if changes to the special events like the balloon races or anything like that are calculated into this already, or is that still up in the air in some way?
Thank you for your question. For the record, this is Eric Crump. So again, both revenue and expenses in the current budget, obviously we had to put something together in a pretty tight time frame. So none of that has been incorporated. I will tell you that, virtually all of the large special events that you see within Washoe County are, there's very little revenue. Revenue is received kind of indirectly through people visiting our area. Great Reno balloon races, Washoe County is a co-sponsor to that. So there aren't a lot of expenses associated with that from the county's perspective, nor is there a lot of revenue associated with that. Same with Hot August Nights. We are a co-sponsor of that event as well. So very little budget impacts specific to parks, but certainly depending on how those events move forward and if people come and visit the area, there will be some impacts, mostly through C-tax. Hope that answered your question.
Yes, it does. Does that affect staff at all, or is it just, do they mostly provide that?
Yeah, so most of our special events, our staffing is pretty much status quo throughout the year. We certainly bring on seasonals, but all special events are required to provide the lion's share of their staffing.
Thank you.
Any other questions, commissioners?
I have a question. This is Commissioner Chung.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Also, just to, one more major special event that Washoe County also sponsors is Art Town. So that is another one that we don't get a great deal of revenue directly, but could be argued that taxes go to that state, which are consolidated. They have a major formula, and then they get sent back to us. So you could say that. So that's another one that it's pretty much revenue neutral. If not, we subsidize it. But we subsidize that because the Board of County Commissioners believes these are important events to have for the community, no matter what the situation is going on, probably more so now than ever. But again, everything is up in the air, and we can't tell you anything one way or the other what's going on because we don't pull those strings. But they're relatively revenue neutral and have been approved by this board historically, the Board of Parks, Regional Parks and Open Space, and then the Board of County Commissioners. I want to go back to one other thing just so you have this information to take back to your communities that you are representing, and that is, in addition to the hiring freeze, any raises that the Board of County Commissioners has direct control over and discretion about. We have denied raises now that we had to approve because we don't like it didn't mean that people didn't deserve the raises. County employees historically have lost a lot of wealth in these downturns. So we know everybody needs them, deserves them, earned them, and if we had the money, we'd give them. But it was to set the tone, which is raises will not be pro forma, and we really don't even want to talk about them. Obviously, the majority of our employees are represented by collective bargaining units, and we have different rules and expectations that both sides agree upon. But I want you to know we are holding a line on any type of raises to go right back to what Mr. Crump said, which is our biggest goal is not to lay people off. We might have to offer them a different job that they might not love, but we don't want to impact the very taxpayers who pay for their own jobs, because that is your largest group of taxpayers. They're right there at Washoe County, and they are large taxpayers, meaning that they're in the lower to middle upper class, lower to middle class. The vast majority, they pay a vast majority more percentage of their actual salary on sales tax, and they are homeowners in the county, and they pay a great deal of property tax as well. So that's the thinking behind that. There's always some science there. I hope you do believe that. But I do want to say this to this board and to Madam Chairwoman, a suggestion. I think that sooner rather than later, we need to have a regional park and open space retreat, because we need this board to go through the budget, which we know we're going to have to open up again. And that's what I wanted to say too. We have by law to submit a signed budget by all commissioners. It's in state statute at the end of May, but that doesn't preclude us from ever going back in and changing the budget. And I can tell you right now, I went through 2007 through 2009, this budget will be changed drastically. So what I need from this board is that you get together before August or September at the latest. That's when we think the special session is happening. I need this board to really get into the nitty-gritty of the parks budget and prioritize for us in parks where you want me looking when we inevitably have to come to tighten up our belt some more. And that comes best from you advising the parks and Community Services Division, and then them bringing it to the Board of Commissioners saying this is what the parks did. And also at that retreat, I think we need a whole new training up on open meeting law, what your goal and role are, go over the bylaws together, and I will play an active role of staff. I know staff is going, where does she think we have time? And I get it, staff. I will do whatever you need me to do, make photocopies, get all the research, but this board needs this more than ever, because it has been, and Mr. Commissioner Doolittle can attest to this. Parks and Rec is not front and center during, as our libraries, during a great downturn, but what you have going for you, commissioners, is that we have all the data now how important parks and open space are when we are social distancing and for the health, and that actually being outdoors is much safer than going to your neighbor's house, for instance, and catching all their indoor germs. So I need you as my advocates, but I really need you as full working commissioners to help us make sure that the cuts that we make are what you believe, talking to your neighborhoods, what people believe are their priorities too. So that is my request from staff and Madam Chair and the Vice Chair and the rest of the commission, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Jung, for that information and recommendation. We can certainly look into that for a future meeting to have a retreat among the commissioners.
And P.S., by the way, I'll pay for, if the parks doesn't have money, and this is how mean we're being about the budget, guys. Ask staff. I wish I was there so I could see their face. We're being this mean about the budget. I have campaign money. I also have money in my commissioner discretionary fund, I think 20 grand. So if we need to rent a place to keep our social distance, if you need sights and sound and whatever you need as staff to do a good job, I'll write the check for it. I'm not asking for you to cut your budget right now when I'm asking these commissioners to help you cut your budget, okay? So let me be very clear about that. I'm willing to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Doug Doolittle. I have a comment. I wholeheartedly agree with you, Commissioner. I think the important priorities right now are making certain that our open spaces, our trails, our larger regional parks are maintained and kept open to the point where people can enjoy them and still social distance, but get in the outdoors and get out of their homes, because we've been sequestered for so long now. It's time that people have an opportunity to get out on the trails and enjoy themselves.
Agreed. Thank you, Commissioner Doolittle. Do we have any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Mr. Crump, for the presentation. We'll go ahead and move to item 10, presentation, discussion, and possible recommendation to Community Services Department staff to negotiate a stormwater facilities easement and an amendment to an existing sewer line easement on Betsy Collin Donnelly Park, as well as appropriate mitigation for said easement and easement amendment with Mayberry Gardens LLC for review and possible approval by the Washoe County Board of County Commissioners. And we have Mrs. Kirschenman that will be presenting.
Excellent. Good afternoon, Chair Chen and Commissioners. Can you all hear me?
We can.
Okay. Okay, here we are. So this item is to review and provide guidance on a parkland easement application for Betsy Collin Donnelly Park. This parkland easement application includes two requests. The first is to amend an existing sewer line easement to allow for the installation of additional utilities. And the second is to grant a stormwater drainage facilities easement. These requests would support a redevelopment project on the applicant's neighboring property. To provide a little bit of context here, the parkland was gifted to the county by Betsy Collin Donnelly in 1990. It's located southeast of the intersection of Mayberry and McCarran. And the applicant's property, which was once owned by Betsy Collin Donnelly, is shown there in the middle. As you can see, it is surrounded by the park on three sides. This is a relatively undeveloped park. There are some nice walking trails, trees, and vegetation on the west side of the park. The south is primarily characterized by an open pasture area. And then to the northeast, Reno Food Systems has been cultivating the land. When the park was originally gifted to the county, a number of deed restrictions were placed on the park, primarily because the adjacent property was Miss Betsy Collin Donnelly's residence, and she wanted to maintain some privacy and also wanted to maintain the rural character of the area. Those deed restrictions limit where the county can build trails and parking areas on the property, and also limits some park uses. As I mentioned, the applicant is first proposing to amend an existing sewer line easement. This easement was granted to the previous owner of the applicant's property, Bath Bishop Land, in 2009. The county property is outlined here in blue, and the approximate easement area is shown here in yellow. It's 20 feet wide and 250 feet long, or just over 1/10 of an acre. Mitigation for that easement included landscaping improvements valued at $15,000 and 6 parking spaces on the applicant's property dedicated for park use. The existing easement language is very specific and allows only for the installation and maintenance of the sewer line. As part of the applicant's redevelopment project, they will need to replace that sewer line with a larger pipe and will also need to bring gas and electric service to the property. Thus, they are requesting an amendment to the existing easement to allow for the installation of those additional utility lines. The applicant did analyze the alternative of installing these lines within the right-of-way. However, this would cost the applicant roughly $26,000 additional dollars and would not negate the need to replace the existing sewer line. So in other words, the easement area would be disturbed either way. The second part of the proposal is a request for a stormwater drainage facilities easement. This easement would be located adjacent to Alum Creek on the west side of the applicant's property. The applicant is required to retain stormwater flows on site, so they are proposing to build a detention basin on their property. However, during significant storm events, stormwater flows may exceed the capacity of the basin, so this easement would allow for any excess stormwater to discharge from the applicant's property into Alum Creek via a drainage swale on the park property. A preliminary estimate of the easement area would be roughly 150 square feet, with approximately 40 square feet of riprap placed. To put that into context, the existing sewer line easement is over 5,000 square feet. So we are talking about a really pretty small area here. This picture is of the park property and that split rail fence, kind of hard to see, but in the upper left-hand sort of corner of the picture, that's the applicant's western property line. The easement would be just upstream of this concrete head wall in the thick of that sort of riparian vegetation. I did try to get closer to the easement area, but it really is in a pretty remote and inaccessible part of the park. Several alternatives were considered. The applicant's original proposal requested an easement for 3 stormwater discharge points along the applicant's western property boundary. One potential alternative is to connect to the municipal storm sewer system. However, the City of Reno's Historic Resources Commission conditioned this project so that all stormwater would need to be detained on site. In other words, connecting to the municipal storm sewer system is prohibited and not an option here. For alternative 2, Washoe County staff asked if they could analyze the viability of routing all flows into the detention basin. This would allow for any excess stormwater flows to discharge at 1 location instead of 3, thereby minimizing overall park impacts. This alternative will cost the applicant approximately $5,000 additional dollars, but the applicant feels as though this better complies with those Historic Resources Commission's low impact design standards and would also minimize park impacts. So staff and the applicant are supportive of this alternative. To mitigate impacts associated with an increased intensity of use due to the amendment of the sewer line easement, as well as impacts associated with the construction of the drainage swale, the applicant and staff are both supportive of the following mitigation measures. The applicant will bring electrical and water lines to the park property to support future park uses. Reno Food Systems has been part of these discussions and they would benefit from the services. For example, these services could potentially support year-round irrigation opportunities and could also support other future park development opportunities. To be clear, Washoe County has existing water rights that could be used, but would have to pay or collaborate with Reno Food Systems to pay the Truckee Meadows Water Authority connection fee. Obviously, as you all just heard, budgets are incredibly tight at the moment, so we're not sure when all of this would take place. But bringing these services to the park really just puts more options on the table for future park development. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there are some existing deed restrictions on the county property. The applicant is also open to amending those deed restrictions since that adjacent property is no longer residential. We're not sure if at this point if that would be a viable option. So our legal counsel is looking into that question. However, it's just one more option that's on the table. Overall, allowing for additional uses within the existing sewer line easement area will not greatly increase impacts to the park. Additionally, the proposed stormwater drainage easement would be located in an area of the park that is difficult to access. Therefore, it wouldn't significantly alter park uses or the user experience. The proposals are compliant with the parkland easement policy as they are complementary with existing park uses. And staff also believe that with the proposed mitigation, granting this easement and easement amendment would be in the interest of the general public. Today, staff is looking for feedback from the Park Commission about the proposal and the mitigation. If you are supportive and would like for us to move forward in negotiating and finalizing this easement and easement amendment for consideration by the Board of County Commissioners, a possible motion is located on page 4 of your staff report. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. The applicant is also on the line and has a brief presentation for you as well.
Great. Before I kind of take over the mic here, does anybody have any questions of Sophia? Nice presentation, by the way. Thank you.
So this is Commissioner Shorts. Where are you planning, where's the idea to put the water and electric power into the, where's the proposed area you're putting that into? More specifically.
Let me go ahead and pull up some drawings here that will give you guys some of the exhibits that we can discuss here and further. So in general, I can jump around here. I can go through this kind of phase by phase. You know, my intent here was...
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Excuse me?
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Can you please ask this person to state their name for the record?
Oh, yes. Can you please state your name for the record? Thank you.
My apologies. My name is Kurt Stitzer, and I am the owner, one of the owners of this property in question. So this drawing right here that I have presented to you guys is the overall site layout for the development. This building right here in the center where you can see my cursor is the existing historic ranch house building. And then behind it is the, we call it the bunkhouse, but the joining of 3 separate structures that were combined back when the nursery was operating on this property. Everything else that you see here in darker line weights is the proposed new improvements to the property. So there's effectively going to be 5 new office buildings. This is a professional office park. So not retail, not bars, but you know, business to consumer or business to business office. To specifically answer your question from before here, the utility easement that currently exists servicing the sewer for this property, as Sophia's shown, is right here that kind of runs from the development out to Mayberry to the north and then turns and heads east into park property, and the property line is right here. So it goes about 300 feet or so through park property on a 25-foot or 20-foot wide easement. And within that easement, we're proposing to replace the existing sewer, as well as add 3-phase power and natural gas service to the development, because currently we're on single-phase power and propane. On this side of the property, as is the second component to this easement, this would be the detention pond that we're building, where all stormwater from the buildings and surface runs and is retained on property to percolate or evaporate with an overflow outfall structure that would go into Alum Creek. So this is the approximately 150 square feet of stormwater discharge that we're requesting. So that's kind of the snapshot of it. Does that answer your question, Commissioner?
Oops. There we go. But are the electric lines going to be then following, that would be available to the parks? Are they going to then be following the sewer line?
Correct. So the intent is that when we bring water into the property, we're going to branch off this water line and go through the easement and out into the park property and set a meter box and backflow preventer for use of Reno Food Systems and the park in the future. As we bring power into the property, there's a vault right here, and there will be a sweep that comes back out of the vault back into park property. And from there, a meter and panel could be set for distribution throughout the park for service to Reno Food Systems and the park in the future. So really, all the stuff that we're proposing within park property is contained within this easement until it gets stubbed outside the easement and then can be taken and distributed from there on park property by either Reno Food Systems or Washoe County Parks in the future.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then this is a grading and drainage plan. Again, this kind of speaks to what we had originally proposed, and as Sophia addressed, there was originally 2 discharge points for surface water from these swales around the building that were designed to come out into park property. What we did is regraded the site and put in some curb cuts and some different things to direct all all water flow from this west property line back into the property and then eventually into this retention basin.
So this is Commissioner Nenzel. I just have a quick question so that I'm clear. All of the construction is going to happen west of what is currently leased to Reno Food Systems, right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other than the utility improvements within the easement that's just on the north side of Reno Food Systems lease.
Right, and the primary reason for adding the additional utility extension is to provide utility for Reno Food Systems and or the remainder of the park.
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to be clear. Thank you.
Hi, this is Commissioner Doolittle. I have a question for either staff or the developer. Has there been a cost determined for the connection of the water and electric to Reno Food Systems?
Commissioner Doolittle, what I had proposed to Reno Food Systems, and I'll break this into 2 components. One, the water, we as a developer are covering all the costs of connecting to the water line and extending the water back to their property, as well as setting the meter vault and the curb stop and everything required per tum wall. So once the water is there, it's their expense to take and distribute it to wherever they need it within their lease. But I am covering all costs associated with getting the water line there. As well as the electric, we will also be installing the conduit that gets them to that location. And from there, they would work with Nevada Energy to set a meter and then obviously enact the power service, and they would be paying their utility bill associated with their usage.
In light of our budget woes, one consideration that I'd like you to think about, if staff hasn't talked to you about it already, is covering the cost of the water connection fees at the point in time that Reno Food Systems or the Parks Department feels it's necessary to go ahead and start making those connections. Is that something that you would consider?
I would have to get a better understanding of exactly what you mean by water connection fees. I confirmed with my engineer and Tumlaw that there will be no additional cost for increasing the tap size on the water main in Mayberry. And once the water was there, it would just be reallocating the water rights that are already associated with the park and putting, the necessary water rights to that service line. So Tumwa has already confirmed that there's adequate water service per the demand that Reno Food Service is proposing when they're at full capacity under their lease. And, they're willing to do the transfer and everything associated with that. So to my knowledge, there isn't any water connection fees above and beyond the engineering, the application, and then, the transferring of the water rights from what is currently servicing through you guys' existing irrigation system to this point of connection.
Maybe I misunderstood staff then. I thought the presentation by staff indicated that there'd be additional water connection fees at the point in time that the system would be charged up. Is that correct, or did I misunderstand?
Sophia Kirschman, Park Planner with Washoe County Planning. It's my understanding that whenever you set up a new service with Tumwa, there is a water connection fee. I don't at this point know what that fee would cost, but I believe that we've had to pay other similar costs at different parks in the past.
And if that's the case, that's the fee that I'm asking if there's a willingness to include that as part of the mitigation.
Kurt Stitzer with Mayberry Gardens. I would be happy to pursue that and get clarification on exactly what that connection fee is. And within reason, I would be happy to absorb that cost. I mean, all the conversations that I've had with Reno Food Systems and Washoe County Parks was that I was trying to get service to them at no cost.
Right.
But the water right allocation and the service fees, associated with consumption would be their responsibility, not that of the developer.
And I understand the consumption part of it. And I appreciate your willingness to look at it with staff to determine if it's something that's doable. That's all for me.
Okay. And then I was also asked, Kurt Stitzer, Mayberry Gardens, I was asked to, in addition to giving you guys an overview of the layout, just to give you guys a quick peek at what this development plan is. For some reason, my computer's being a little weird here. But this is the landscape drawing here. So the adjacent property to the park, when it's fully developed, which is probably about 18 months from now, will be fully landscaped. So the landscaping that is existing on the developed portion of the park to the west of the property will be pretty cohesive with that landscaping and the landscaping that exists around the current buildings, existing structures, and continued through. So as you're in the park area that's leased to Reno Food Systems, looking back towards our property, it'll be beautified and enhanced to be complementary and commensurate with Washoe County Parks property that's to our east. I'd be happy to answer any specific questions as it pertains to that. And then these are just some preliminary renderings of what the buildings are going to end up looking like. As I said, there's 5 different buildings here, 3 building types. And a lot of this stuff is kind of designed around the conditions put on the project by the Historic Resources Commission, in that they wanted something that was in the spirit of the ranch farm history of the property, but not anything that would match the existing structures such that they're easily identifiable and differentiated. So these are kind of a more modern rendition of a ranch house or a barn. And so I apologize that these are all the exact same color palette, but that's what we have from our architect at this point. But these are just the anticipated elevations and aesthetic of the buildings that are going to be constructed on site. So with that, I have nothing else to share with you guys, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
This is Commissioner.
Oops, sorry.
Yeah, Commissioner Shorts, are you going to keep the goats? That's important to the neighborhood.
The goats?
Yes, the goats at in the little barn out there.
The goats were actually livestock that was owned by one of the people that worked at Reno Food Systems, raised and slaughtered. So sorry to put a down spin on that, but that's not something that was owned by or managed by the previous owners or ourselves of this property. That was just something that the previous owners allowed the neighbors to raise in that goat pen.
Okay. They like the neighborhood likes the raising part. All right, thank you.
This is Commissioner Doolittle again. Sophia, is my understanding that you're still working out the details of the deed restrictions and clearing those up before this goes forward?
That's correct. We just aren't sure at this point whether or not essentially Kurt would be the successor in interest from Betsy Collin Donnelly. And we're just not sure if legally we can move forward if he's able to execute a deed, essentially an amendment to the deed restriction at this point.
Okay, and that's something you have to work out before it goes to the county commissioners?
We need to finalize all mitigation before it goes to the commissioners. That's correct.
All right, thank you.
If I may, this is Eric Crump.
Go ahead.
I would just like to add, in working through possible amendment to the deed restrictions, there are, several restrictions that really are in the spirit of keeping this area, culturally realistic with the farming and the ranching that happen. And we certainly don't want to change those, but there's some restrictions that were put in place due to the fact that there was a residential component almost, entirely within the park space, and that is now changed and it's a commercial component. So those are some of the deed restrictions that we'd be looking at amending.
So this is Commissioner Nenzel. It's not really on this topic, but it is on the pasture topic. Or just curious if we're likely to see cows on the pasture this year.
I would defer to Sophia Kirschman, Park Planner with Washoe County. I would defer to Colleen on that question.
Yeah, for the record, Colleen Wallace Barnum, I would anticipate cows on the property this year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spencer and Ms. Kirschman, for your presentation.
I have one question, sorry. This is Jennifer Oliver. Is there any contingent, I don't know the status of your permit for your business park. Is any part of this contingent upon the approval of that, or has that already been approved?
Yeah, everything has been approved. The entitlements were in place before I actually acquired the property. We have resubmitted and would expect to have a permit on the site improvements and development permit within a couple of days, and would be prepared to begin site development, earthwork grading, utilities, things like that, halfway, maybe the latter half of the month. And then from there, we are in for permit on the new buildings probably next week. And then we already do have construction permits for the remodel improvements and additions onto the existing bunkhouse structure, and that construction is underway.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your feedback and questions. Commissioners, if you don't have any other questions, or do we feel comfortable making a motion?
Do we call for public comment?
Oh, yeah. Is there any public comment? Sorry.
No, no public comment.
Okay.
Jennifer Oliver. I would move to recommend that Community Services Department staff negotiate a stormwater facilities easement and an amendment to an existing sewer line easement on Betsy Collin Donnelly Park, as well as appropriate mitigation for said easement and easement amendment with Mayberry Gardens LLC for review and possible approval by the Washoe County Board of Commissioners.
Second, Shorts.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and move to item 11, discussion and possible recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners to approve the Blackstone Park Maintenance Agreement between Washoe County and Blackstone's Estates Homeowners Association.
Okay, Sophia Kirschman, Park Planner with Washoe County Planning. There's no presentation for this item, just a kind of a brief overview, but this item is the Blackstone Park Maintenance Agreement. You might recall that in September of last year, the Park Commission recommended that the Board of County Commissioners approve the Blackstone Park Construction Agreement. And shortly thereafter, the BCC did approve that agreement. Basically, the developer of the Blackstone Estates subdivisions and the neighborhood or the neighboring Sugarloaf Ranch subdivision requested to utilize the residential construction tax funds that were generated through the development of those subdivisions for the construction of a neighborhood park in that area. The park is to be located east of Pyramid Highway, just north of Calle de la Plata in Spanish Springs. And once completed, the park will include picnic tables, benches, a playground structure, irrigation, landscaping. Per the approved park construction agreement, the park will be owned and maintained by the Blackstone Estates Homeowners Association in perpetuity. However, last September, when the park construction agreement was approved, the HOA hadn't been established yet. So that agreement basically said that once the HOA was established, Washoe County and the HOA would enter into a maintenance agreement for the park. And that's what you have before you today. It's pretty straightforward, but lays out the terms and provisions for maintaining that park in perpetuity. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about that. And Carl Matzel from JC Blackstone LLC is also on the line, I believe, today and available to answer any questions that you might have about the park.
Thank you, Ms. Kirschman. Any questions, commissioners, for Sophia or Mr. Maxwell? No? Okay, does anyone want to make a motion?
Motion to approve. This is Commissioner Short's motion to approve the maintenance agreement.
Mr. Doolittle, second.
Okay.
Dang, look at that beard.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you. All right. Item 12, presentation, update, and discussion on the River Bend boundary line adjustment on Washoe County's parcel number 038-10034 in Verdi, Nevada, to obtain additional riverfront property along the Truckee River for future trails and river access.
Okay, Sophia Kirschman, Park Planner with Washoe County Planning for the record. So this next item is an update on the status of the River Bend Boundary Line Adjustment, or the BLA. As you might recall, this proposal was originally presented to the Park Commission in June of last year, and the Commission was supportive and recommended that staff move forward and negotiate this agreement. Today, we wanted to bring you up to speed with where we are at in this process, describe some of the next steps, and also provide the opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. So first, this is just a quick overview of the property and the proposal. This began as an unsolicited proposal submitted by the Riverbend Mobile Home Park and Storage LLC, or the applicant, for a potential boundary line adjustment between Washoe County Park property and the applicant's adjacent property. These properties are located between the old US Highway 40 and the Truckee River in Verdi. Washoe County acquired this parcel, also known as the Riverbend property, in 2011. You might recall that the Riverbend property was acquired utilizing state and county bond funds. The use of state funding does require that the property only be used to protect or enhance natural, cultural, historical, or recreational resources. So when this property was acquired, the county and the state entered into a non-revocable agreement to restrict the uses on the property, or deed restriction, basically saying that the property could only be used for open space, trails, trailhead amenities, and that sort of thing. So as part of this BLA process, the agreement with the state does need to be transferred from the existing property to the adjusted property. Before I move on from this slide, I just wanted to briefly note here that the Truckee Meadows Water Authority, or TUMWA, does own a small parcel there to the southeast of the applicant's existing property. It's outlined there in white, and it actually provides them access to maintain one of their dams that crosses the river in that location. And so that will be important in just a minute. And as a refresher, the proposal is to exchange the riverfront portions of the applicant's property for the inland portions of the county's property. The original proposal, as you saw it last year, would have resulted in the applicant gaining approximately 6 additional acres, developable acres. However, after negotiations, the final boundary line adjustment would result in the applicant gaining about 4.5 additional acres. The county would lose the acreage, but would gain the ability to build a parking lot and a river access path. I wanted to show this map of the county's existing parcel just so that you can see how steep the slopes are that lead down to the water. So there really just aren't any great fishing or river access points on our existing property. And the parcel is also landlocked and really not an ideal place for access, not an ideal place for recreation, and hasn't really been used for recreation in the past. You can kind of see a little social trail along the river, and that's probably primarily been used by the subdivision, people who live in the subdivision to the west. However, the county's resulting parcel has much gentler slopes, as you can see by those topographic lines on the eastern side of the parcel. Those gentler slopes provide for some excellent fishing and river access points. We see fishermen down there all the time. And also, as you can see, the property that the county would be gaining has more trees, has more riparian vegetation. So the BLA would also help to protect an important riparian corridor. In addition to the BLA, staff have also been moving forward on securing the permits to actually construct that parking lot and access path. It might be a little difficult to see here, but the proposed, if you can see past what I've got going, it goes around. But the parking lot is shown in the upper right-hand corner, the northeastern property corner. It's shown in that sort of pink and peach color. And the orange line shows the path to the parcel owned by TUMWA, and then the lighter orange shows the rest of the trail upstream from the TUMWA parcel. Typically, we would probably have waited until the BLA was finalized to begin permitting, but we did have some state question 1 funding that was set to expire in June. So the thought process was to spend some of that remaining funding on permitting costs for the project so that it could be used as match to apply for grants. And then Joanne Loudon, our natural resources planner, she did just submit a Land and Water Conservation Fund grant application for this project just last week. So the hope is that when the BLA is finalized, we will have a shovel-ready project ready to go with. Another complementary project is that the Truckee Meadows Water Authority, or TUMWA, is currently planning to build a river portage, or also known as a trail, around their dam. This would allow for rafters to exit the river, walk around the dam, and then re-enter the river, thus mitigating some safety impacts on their end. The county's proposed trail would not only provide river access for fishing and swimming, as I mentioned, but would also potentially be a location for rafters to either enter or exit the river with their rafts. The trail to the parking area from the TUMWA portage is proposed to be 10 feet wide, which would provide enough space for people to carry their rafts out or in. And then upstream of the portage, it would be just 4 feet wide. Here is a brief overview of the steps that have been completed thus far. I'll see those. The steps that have been completed thus far. There are quite a few of them. Sorry for all the text on this slide. So as you know, the Park Commission recommended that staff move forward and negotiate the BLA last June. Since that time, staff have been working with the applicant to finalize the terms of the BLA. The applicant had an appraisal conducted, which showed that the applicant's resulting property would be valued at $95,000 less than their existing property. And this is primarily due to the fact that the existing county parcel has a power line that basically bisects the property, really kind of minimizing any development potential. In order to develop this parcel in the future, the applicant would be required to work with NV Energy to move that power line. And as you can imagine, that's quite expensive. However, they have agreed to bear that financial burden. Additionally, in April, the City of Reno Planning Commission approved a special use permit for the construction of the Riverbend Trailhead and access path. The BCC also directed staff to conduct the BLA and approved several agreements in May. And as I mentioned just last week, Joanne Loudon submitted our Land and Water Conservation Fund grant application. In terms of next steps, there are also quite a few of those, but the Nevada Division of State Lands first needs to execute the agreements that would transfer those deed restrictions from the existing county property to the resulting county property. Once that happens, the applicant would file a quiet title action to establish clean title and ownership of the properties in question. The applicant would submit the BLA application to the City of Reno, as these properties are located within the city's jurisdiction. And Washoe County and the applicant would publish any required notifications. In the meantime, we will finalize the covenants, agreements, and easements associated with the proposed BLA. In addition to the agreements I've already mentioned with the state, there are several easements that Washoe County would be requesting across the applicant's resulting property, and then vice versa. And finally, all documents would be recorded at the same time in the office of the Washoe County Recorder. And I think with that, I would again be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Madam Chair, I have a question. Thank you for this presentation. This is Jennifer Oliver. Is there any connectivity with the Tahoe Pyramid Bikeway or potential for?
Yeah, so the Tahoe Pyramid Bikeway right now actually just uses Highway 40. So this does sort of tie right into that. It wouldn't be a thoroughfare. You couldn't go anywhere west of the edge of the county parcel, but it does sort of provide an area to stop off.
So for the bike path, sorry, it's Commissioner Menzel. For the bike path, is there any thought of continuing to connect this back towards, I guess, the typical Verdi route for bike travel?
I'm not sure exactly where you're referring to as the typical Verdi route.
Well, so the typical, I'd have to look at Google Maps. I'll defer.
Yeah, this would primarily, so right across from Highway 40, there's a big subdivision in the city of Reno. And as part of that subdivision, the developer has built and is sort of in the process of building a bunch of trails that head up onto Peavine. So there will be some opportunities to sort of cross and go up from there. And you could also, enter that or park at that location and then use your bike and sort of travel either east or west. And we see a lot of bikers out there on that road.
This is Commissioner Shorts. I think on that, it's going to be valuable to get with the Truckee Pyramid Bike Trail just to have some signage in there, since it'll be it really will be a new trailhead for them. And I'm very excited to see that from a kayak or rafters, because that's a really nasty place to try to portage around. So that'll be nice to have. Is there any plan to have any like restrooms or anything like that in part of this process?
Sophia Kirschman, Park Planner, and I believe Joanne Loudon's also on the line if she wants to jump in on any of this. But at this point, no, there wouldn't be any restrooms proposed. We are proposing a trailhead with some signage, and it would be consistent with the rest of the One Truckee River signage. So it would be consistent all along in that river corridor.
Okay, great.
And then also there are, I can't remember exactly how many parking spaces off the top of my head, but there is a sort of a temporary loading space because it's a pretty limited area. So the idea is that people could actually load their rafts in, drop the rafts off, and if there wasn't parking, they could park either, sort of along the highway. There's a lot of people who park there, or just at another location and, drive back up, carpool back up.
All right, I'd just like to say I think this is it's going to be a really nice little addition to our parks.
Any other questions?
What's our motion on this?
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Kirschenman, for that presentation.
Thank you.
We'll go ahead and move along to item 13, Parks Reports.
Thank you. For the record, Colleen Wallace Barnum, Park Operations Superintendent. Since we have not met in in a long time, I thought I would just give some updates because we actually have some hirings that are important ones. So I just want to make sure I highlight some of the things we've been doing for the past couple of months. And so in the North region, we hired a new Park Ranger 1. His name is Gabe Barbado, and he works out of the Lazy 5 Regional Park in the Powrod District. So we want to welcome Gabe, and we're looking forward to being able to introduce him personally at some point in the future. The other hire we did in the middle, probably I would say March 20th, was Shane Weckerly. Shane is our new recreation coordinator. He has an office based out of Rancho San Rafael Park, and he would be the person responsible for all of the aquatics facilities, but he also manages all of the park permitting for the field permits, in addition to some other programs that we do over the wintertime coming from the cold, and then also the Robert C. Hawkins Amphitheater. So we want to welcome Shane to our full-time staff, as well as Gabe. And then wanted to make sure you know that there's 2 ongoing construction projects right now out at Bowers Mansion Regional Park. If you go out there, you're going to see a lot of activity, both at the pool and at the mansion. The mansion project is primarily improvements to the exterior of the historic structure. We were in line with all of our requirements through the State Historic Preservation Office and keeping in line with the historic value of the structure. There's a lot of improvements that need to be done after kind of the flood years of 2016 and 2017. We saw a lot of that water creep into the building and needed to do some improvements. So working diligently on that. We're hoping to reopen the mansion for tours in July. And that's really basically just based on construction currently. In addition, we have through a grant funded project through the William N. Pennington Foundation, we're going to increase the pool deck size at Bowers Mansion Pool. So there'll be 2 reservable party pavilions right next to each other on the pool deck. And those will be reservable, next season, which is great. It's actually a revenue offset for the pools, which is highly needed out there because pools generally don't operate in the black. So we're looking forward to that being available for next season. And that's it for the park reports. I wanted to just let everybody know, obviously the museum with its closure, we really didn't see a whole lot of business for Animation Academy, and we're making plans for next year's traveling exhibit, hoping that maybe we can do some type of a smaller exhibit if schools are still not able to travel with their students. Volunteer services have really been delayed because of the COVID response. So just making sure everybody knows that when we now are welcoming back our Arboretum volunteers, and there's actually sort of a whole touchless, if you will, process. They don't even have to come into the office. There's a new software system that Denise Evans has been working with. It's called Volgistics, and volunteers can check in online, bring their own tools, and go right to the location where they're supposed to help work, which has been just a nice seamless process during this time. So we're trying it out, just started that this week. And then I'm not sure if you guys have any questions on the park planning report, but I do believe Joanne is on the line in case anybody has questions for park planning. But there are some new things, Joanne. I was thinking maybe we could talk about that Rancho Trail, but some new projects that have taken place and have been completed.
This is Commissioner Doolittle. I have a question on the Park District reports, Colleen. When you go into phase 3, COVID-19 phase 3, what have you discussed at all the indoor operations, whether masks will be required or not required? Is that even surfaced yet, or is that something that you're going to be thinking about?
It's
And I'm talking about the indoor facilities only.
absolutely. We are currently looking. We're going all based on the guidelines, right? So whatever the CDC recommendations are, whatever the OSHA recommendations are. Currently, we are recommending face coverings for like if we were to allow, I shouldn't say allow, if one of our indoor facilities in the group wanted to come and do an event for 50 or less people in one of our larger facilities, we would be recommending face coverings for all participants. The outdoors, I think, is a little bit easier, and you didn't refer to the outdoors. I think just because you can social distance a little bit easier, but indoors, based on those social distancing measures and maybe not being able to social distance as much, but face covering certainly being recommended. And again, based on whatever comes out in phase 3, I think that's probably still going to be in place in phase 3.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, thank you, Colleen, for that update.
You bet.
Item 14, Director's Report.
Afternoon. For the record, Dave Solero, Director of Community Services Department, Assistant County Manager. Not a lot to report this month that hasn't been covered in some of the reports by Colleen and Eric, but I did want to put on the record how proud you all should be of the park staff that have continued to work for the benefit of our community. The staff has gone above and beyond in my mind. They have really embraced the opportunity to provide good things for our community during this uncertain time. And so I really wanted to just take this opportunity to thank all of you Washoe County operations staff that has been out there dealing with the public. As you can imagine, it's not always the most pleasant, political views and other things aside. But I do believe that they have done yeoman's work in continuing to provide the best park experience for our community. So with that, I am here available for any questions you may have, but I think a lot of information has been covered by Colleen and Eric today, but I do truly appreciate the work that our staff has done for this community.
Commissioner Doolittle again. Director or Assistant County Manager Solero. I really appreciate those comments because I think they're very valid. During tough times, the park staff has always stood up and really done an incredible job maintaining the parks, dealing with the public, like you say, that aren't always happy to hear about rules that may be in place, but I think they do a terrific job, and I'm glad that you spoke up on this and provided those comments. Thank you.
Mr. Solero?
Yes.
Oh, hi. Yeah, Darla Lee. I noticed we didn't have a golf report, but I'm wondering if you might give us an update on what is going on with Wild Creek Golf Course.
Sure. As a director's report, as you are all aware, I believe we made you aware anyway that the current operator of the golf course enacted a provision within the contract to essentially cancel the license agreement that we had. So Washoe County has hired a maintenance worker to continue to maintain the golf course out there at Wild Creek while I go through the process of trying to get a new golf operator on board to open that facility. I am currently in negotiations of kind of some finer deal points that then I will need to get with our district attorney representative to put into some type of an agreement. Hopeful that I can get it to the Board of County Commissioners by the end of June. The last meeting in June, I believe, is the 26th of June, where I can get an agreement on there so that we can open back up portions of Wild Creek Golf Course. We have determined not to spend the money to revamp that golf course at this time, but I do believe in working with one of our current operators that we can open the 9-hole par 3 course and a 6-hole loop of existing holes, get back to the clubhouse So that's what we're going to see whether we can accomplish that in favorable conditions to for the Gulf Enterprise Fund. But that's currently where we stand with Wild Creek.
Okay, so just for clarification, you said that the money that is existent that was supposed to be redesigning the golf course has been put on hold for the moment, or?
The project of redesign, the redesign is complete. The actual project to construct has been put on hold for this year. Just timing and a few other things is not possible. So we have put that on hold while we go through this process, but the money is still safe in the enterprise fund specific for use at Wild Creek Golf Course property.
All right, thank you very much.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Solero, for your update.
Thank you very much.
Okay, item 15, any commissioners' comments?
Commissioner Oliver.
This is Jennifer Oliver. I would just echo Dave's and Doug's sentiments with park staff. I have been pretty much almost every day at a county park for my own personal work from home break, mental health, wellness. And I'm seeing a lot of people, and I just think that the staff has done an amazing job. So thank you so much.
No, I would like to echo that as well. It's been a trying time, and to have it available to have the open space. I know we have gone to the Arboretum and been so thankful, over the past few months that's been open, as well as the other parks. So thanks again.
And I want to just thank all of our park commissioners, park staff. Thank you everyone for being here so that we can have a meeting in the midst of COVID-19. So thank you all for joining our meeting today. All right. Okay, if there's no other commissioner comments, we will move to item 16, public comments.
We have no public comment.
Okay, thank you. All right, we will go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 4:19. Thank you, everyone.